This is just a quick video to show you my method for seaming the ribbed pumpkin, and it gives it pretty close to an invisible seam, which is really nice when you finish it and it's nice and round and you can barely tell where it's been put together. So when you're done, it'll look something like this, and we'll have to seam the two ends together and then stuff it and complete it. So for that, we are going to put the end that we have our long 12-inch starting tail towards the top of the pumpkin, and our 3-yard tail that we cut when we were done with row 43. They're going to be on the right side of you because you're going to be working across seaming this way. And this is pretty easy as long as you know what loops you're going to be working in. The top is going to be your foundation row. So these are all going to look like single crochets because you worked your first row in the back loop of the chain rather than the top stitch of the chain. Now the top stitch of the chain is along the top here. The bottom row, the bottom edge is going to be the last row of the half double crochet that you did. And the interesting thing about a half double crochet stitch is you've got your regular stitch here on the top, but then you also have this third loop, which makes the side look like the top of a stitch too. So that's what gives you these really cool, almost knit look ribs on this pumpkin, is that third loop on the half double crochet. What we're going to do now is tuck the foundation edge under that third loop, kind of, for lack of a better way of explaining it. So anyway, let's get started and you'll see what I mean. We're going to be using the top loop or back loop of both rows, and that's what we're going to go in and out of, back and forth, just like that, all the way down to the end. So the first stitch is the stitch on the foundation row. It's the stitch that your tail is attached to. It's this stitch right here, and we're going to be working in the back loop of that stitch. The first stitch we'll be using is the stitch that your yarn is coming out of here at the end, and again we'll be using that back loop. So let's go ahead and do that first stitch together. So we're going to insert our needle through the back loop of the first stitch on the top and the back loop of the first stitch on the bottom, and we're going to go ahead and pull our yarn through. Get that tail out of the way. There we go. Okay, now we're going to go up, but we're going to use the same loop of the next two stitches. So we're going to have the back loop on the bottom row first, and then the back loop on the top row, and then we'll pull our yarn through. Your yarn can start to get a little curly because it's being twisted as we're doing this. Now we'll move on to the next one. Right here you've got your back loop of the top row and your back loop of the bottom row. We'll pull the yarn through. Same thing, next stitch. Back loop, together. This will get really easy to see the more you do it. So now that we've gotten to, you've got your slip stitch, single crochet, and then all of your half double crochets. Now that we've gotten to the half double crochets, I just wanted to point out your back loop is the third loop all the way back here. Because remember, on that half double crochet, you have an extra loop here. So it's not this loop. It's the one at the very back. This one back here. Okay, so you should still have what looks like a stitch in front, and you're not using either one of those. You're using this one back here into the, whoops, I'm supposed to be going the other way, aren't I? So back loop here and very back loop here. Go ahead and pull our yarn through. And again, back loop, back loop, pull the yarn through. You don't have to pull it tight. Back loop, very back loop, pull the yarn through. Back loop, pull the yarn through. So basically what we're getting is what looks to be just another rib. So that when you stuff your pumpkin, it's all gonna look pretty much the same, which is kind of cool. So that's how we go ahead and seam up the ribbed pumpkin. Now I am done seaming up my pumpkin and all of the back loops, and you can see that it comes together very nicely and it looks very similar to any of the other ribs. So it's a virtually invisible seam if you don't know what you're looking for. Nice and clean. So now it's on to cinching the top, stuffing the pumpkin, and cinching the bottom. And then once we get to that point, we will come back here and I will show you how I shape the pumpkin by running a tapestry needle through and back with yarn to squish the top and bottom inward to give it that very pumpkin-y shape. So once I get to that point, I will meet you back here. I thought it might be beneficial for you to see how I glue the stem to the pumpkin on the inside. And what I do is I just take a hot glue gun and I just go all the way around the stem on the inside of the pumpkin. So I've turned it kind of inside out here. And I just put a nice thick layer of hot glue all the way around. And when it dries, as it hardens, it's just going to meld those two together so the stem will stay nice and tight in place where you want it to be. So as soon as this dries, we'll go ahead and stuff it and cinch the bottom tight and fasten that off. And then we are on to shaping. All right, so now we have a stem glued into place, nice and tight around it, and that end on the ribbed pumpkin is woven in. On the cabled pumpkin, your long 3-yard tail is on the top. So after you fasten it with a knot, you are going to use it for this part. On the ribbed pumpkin, our long tail here is on the bottom. So we'll start from the bottom, and it doesn't really matter which end you're starting from for this step. So we have a cute little pumpkin right now, and it looks, you know, adorable the way that it is, but what we really want to do is kind of make it a little more pumpkin-y, if you will, you know, more like that kind of. So we are going to use a tapestry needle. Mine is, I think, 10 or 12 inches. And so I'm going to insert it through one end and it will come out the other end in roughly the same spot. And then I'll turn it and we'll do it again, and I'll turn it and we'll do it again. And we're gonna do it about 10 or so times around so that the pumpkin ends up being inward like that and a little more pumpkin-y shaped. So I'm gonna go ahead and thread my long tail onto my ginormous tapestry needle. For a small pumpkin, you can make a yarn needle work, but it is difficult, almost impossible to use a yarn needle if you're making a big chunky pumpkin with chunky yarn. This one you could squish enough to get it through, but these are pretty cheap. I think on Amazon I got this one for $7 or $8, and I'll bet you I've made 25 pumpkins this year with all of my scrap yarn laying all over. So it was definitely a good investment. It saved my fingers. So We are starting from the bottom on the ribbed pumpkin. So I am going to insert. Now I don't want to insert the yarn over here or any way too far away from where it's coming out, because otherwise I'll just end up with a line of yarn across the bottom. So I'm just going to insert it in right close to where my yarn is coming out. And now I want to come out about right here, because that's about the same place. Let's see if I can get the angle on this to show you. About the same place right there. So I've got my tapestry needle going all the way through the center. So I am going to pull the yarn all the way through. So it will be coming out the top now instead of the bottom. And when I get it all the way through, I'm just gonna pull it just a little bit. Now, not much is going to happen on this first stitch, and it's not really gonna catch yet, but this next pass, you'll be able to see how it's going to start flattening the pumpkin. So on the top, I came out right here. I'm only gonna come over like 1 or 2 threads of yarn, because I don't want any lines of yarn going across the top of my pumpkin and going back in. So I'm just gonna grab 1 or 2 little threads of yarn. I like this spot right here for this, and I'm gonna put it back in. And no, I'm not, because that was the exact same hole, which is hilarious. That's hard to do. All right, so we're gonna go over just a little bit in between these two right here. And we're going to maybe, there we go back down and out through the bottom in about the same spot on the same side of the cinched enclosure. And then we will pull our yarn through. Don't be surprised if you get some stuffing pulling out with the yarn on some of these, especially on the chunky yarn. The stuffing really loves to come through. Okay, now watch the top here when we tug now. So now it's starting to come in a little bit. See that? If you can see it, and it'll hold a little bit more. The more passes you get in, the more it's gonna hold. So I'm gonna continue doing this all the way around the stem. So again, the yarn comes out here. We're just gonna kind of go in next to it. Maybe. I'm not using a real, this is more of a, it's not a acrylic, it's more cottony, so it's a little harder. It's not as forgiving to get a needle through. So we're gonna come up through there. Our first stitch was here. We're coming over just a little bit, and we'll put the tapestry needle through again. So we wanna do this all the way around. And tug on it just a little every time so that you're pulling the pumpkin inward like this. So go ahead and finish doing the same process all the way around the stem. Try to keep it very close to the stem, because that's how it's going to be the most invisible, and that's where you want it to go in anyway. And I will be back as soon as I'm done to show you the finished product. All right. We are done with that step, and as you can see, it kind of brought the center of my pumpkin down in and flattened out the bottom of my pumpkin. So it sits nice and flat now, and it's got a real fun pumpkin-y shape to it. And as you can see, that join is virtually invisible. It is right there, but you can barely see it. So that's kind of fun too. So on the bottom, I did my last pass. I removed my yarn, my tapestry needle. I'm going to cut the excess off the tail. You will probably have a lot, but I like cutting extra because I've cut too short before, and that's a real pain. So I'm going to thread this on my yarn needle, and I'm going to make a couple knots just by running the yarn through itself a couple of times. Oops, that one came off the needle on me. So do a couple knots and then weave in a bit of a tail. So those knots don't come undone. Trim your tail and you now have yourself an adorable little ribbed pumpkin. Shaping the cabled pumpkin is exactly the same. So you'll just go up and down right around the stem like you did on this one. So I hope you have so much fun making these. I can't wait to see them. Hit social media, tag me in your projects. I made a ton of them to give away this year and they are well received, let me tell you. Everybody loves them, so I hope you enjoy making them as much as I do. Thanks.